My name is Ramirez. I'm Frogbear. You can call me Rami. Now, how do I begin this? All right, so with what I've been researching with what I have currently on my lap, right? It's Kinsey. Going through his material is very difficult. It's not very easy. Because it kind of relates to what occurred in the early 1900s and during the late 1800s. So I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible because this might be very lengthy in due course. But let's start off with this statement from Mr. Gore. This is a conversation between him and Noam Chomsky. I'm pretty sure most people know who that is.
I think at some point we should
Oh, wait.
always make the point that you talked about this is in Russia. The government doesn't give orders to the press and so on. No, it doesn't. Mm-hmm. What we have is a ruling class which we're never supposed to say exists, but it does. It's a very powerful one. It's partly money. It's partly bright kids who are trained at places like Harvard to run the place. Mm-hmm. You don't have to call up the editor of the New York Times or the President of the United States, the head of CBS, and give them the policy on the Middle East. Mm-hmm. They have these jobs because they think alike. Mm-hmm. They've been gone to the same conditioned schools. They have the same worldview. Mm-hmm. And where odd types like Chomsky and I come along, and I don't know what motivates him, but I'm much motivated by, I wouldn't even say anything so lofty as a sense of justice as I am by incongruity. Mm-hmm. Illogic drives me crazy. Mm-hmm.
I waited for that because when I see illogical arguments, it drives me nuts. But back to the statement that he said that these people have these positions of jobs because of what they believe in, right? These people have the same worldview. Now, this relates to a document that I've already shown here before. This is an essay by Garland E. Allen. And to view, hopefully I can view this document without it being zoomed in. Apparently not. This is the Eugenics Record Office. Does this ever disappear? I don't think it does. I'm just going to refresh the page. It's weird. Either way, yeah. The Eugenics Record Office at Cold Spring Harbor, 1910 to 1940. Now, the pages that I want to focus on are towards the end of this really well-written document. Where is it? 251? The new visiting committee on 1935. No. This is when the committee comes in. This is where they categorizing the things that they were keeping at the office. Hold on. I should have pre-planned this ahead of time, right? Okay. Mirror of the Progressive Era. Now, it's very important to understand what's occurring in a time perspective manner, right? So, the ERO brought together a number of strands of American social history during the late 19th and early 20th century. Among these were the spirit of reform that grew out of an evangelical notions of social responsibility, as exemplified by Andrew Carnegie's own Gospel of Wealth, the broad economic changes that accompany widespread industrialization, practically the shift from laissez-faire to planned capitalism, right? There was an approach, or at least the original economic approach was hands-off. Let the market dictate it. What they discovered was, why not just plan it? Why not just plan economical ventures? The cult of efficiency has developed in the industrial and later the social spheres, right? Later the social spheres is important. The rise of a new sector of the middle class, the professional managers, including scientific experts, engineers, social workers, socialists, and foundation directors. And lastly, concern with the problem of social control, of using scientific, which meant also sociological, knowledge to achieve greater social and economic stability. There is a very big emphasis on controlling the economy. But in controlling the economy, the way that they were looking at it was, well, in order for us to control economic growth, we also need to control what people are doing essentially with their lives. This gets much worse. Right? Because this is the ethosphere. This is the mentality that's going on at the late 1800s and the early 1900s, right? They wanted to shape the world. While it is impossible to discuss all these aspects of eugenic history in detail, I would like to emphasize here the way in which the ERO mirrored the notions of reform, scientific planning, efficiency, and social control that were harbored by its wealthy benefactors and their middle-class professional advisors. Right? They all go to the same schools. They all get the same education. They're all a part of this really nice, neatly tight circle. The last decades of the 19th and first decades of the 20th century in the United States were times of considerable upheaval in economic, class, and demographic patterns. I could keep on going, but I'm going to read. Despite these reservations about the term, distinct concerns with the points of view did not come to the fore during those years. James Weinstein has emphasized the important shift that wealthy elites made from laissez-faire to managed or planned capitalism during the period of 1890 and 1920. Footnotes are very important, right? 79, see Robert Wyde's The Search for Order, 1967. Not only had industrialization created new economic problems of its own, but it also magnified many, go to the next page, problems that are already encountered during the earlier stages of development in American capitalism. Price fluctuations, inflation, small business failures, accompanied by growth of monopolies and depressions. There had been several depressions between 1870 to the 1900s. Particularly serious ones, 1873 and 1893. In response to the current problems, radical trade union organizing, right, as well from within the movement had increased drastically in 1880. The Haymarket Affair of Chicago, 1886. The Homestead Steel Strike, Plowman Strike, right? There was all of these things that these wealthy elites were encountering with their labor unions, with their stock, their workers, right? Because again, they wanted cheap labor, and I'll get to that in a bit, because they keep on going. But it wasn't just the fact that they were dealing with the people striking. Labor agitation and the instability it brought became issues of major concern among the wealthy elites. Various sectors of the wealthy business class had gradually been won by these realities to the concept of a more planned economy. Yeah, we know. This was the era that saw the passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890 and the beginnings of federal regulatory activities, the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission, further strengthened in 1906, the enactment of the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906, and the creation of the Federal Trade Commission in 1914. Right? So you're viewing what's not really a fair war, because in reality, one side has way more capital, way more money, and way more devices in order to entice these politicians. So that's not really a concern for them. What is efficiency experts such as the engineer Frederick Wilson Taylor created a scientific of efficient business operation. Efficiency came to mean analysis of the input and output of factory, machine, and human activities alike, the breaking down of complex tasks into discrete components under the control of planners, and finally, accentuation of the process of division of labor, including such innovations as the assembly line. Right? Their whole thing is, we need to make our economy, or we need to make our devices more efficient for us to get more of an output. And, there's actually people that we can point to that prove this. One of them is Galton. But the person that is actually more influential in this case is...
Things changed when a guy named Thomas Malthus came along. He was an economist, and he was wise to understand the relationship between population and labor demand. No one had really knocked that out the park quite like he did. So this is a long document. Now, this is his words. This is population.
Right, so you had Thomas Malthus, it says Thomas Malthus, who was essentially the guy that figured out that price demand over products, but he also figured out the labor question, which was the less labor you have, the more you can pay skilled laborers, but the more of a population you do have, the less you can pay your overall workers. And he gets into the science of Malthus. But what's very interesting is how Malthus was a very key inspiration to Darwin, right? And Darwin read Malthus, and he says, I happen to read for amusement Malthus on population, and being well prepared to appreciate the struggle of existence which everywhere goes on from long continued observation of the habits of animals and planets. It at once struck me that under these circumstances, favorable variations would tend to be preserved and unfavorable ones be destroyed. The result of this would be the formation of a new species. So he reads Malthus and is like, very interesting. Maybe I could... I don't know how he comes to this conclusion of, the labor population question, maybe I can make a new species out of this. The solution, as I believe, is the modified offspring of all dominant and increasing forms tend to become adapted to many highly diverse places in the economy of nature. In a roundabout way, saying that if we can create this new formation of species, it would adapt to the environment that we present it, right? So this is all ideas that are forming at the end of the 1800s, And remember, what's going on at the end of the 1800s and during the early 1900s? You have this very interesting ecclesiastical class of people that are trying not to just shape population in terms of eugenics, breeding, and all that other stuff, but you also have them doing this not for the purpose of them wanting to see the world in their image, but more for the world to just, push forward their agenda, push forward their ventures, their ideas, their mechanisms of wealth. But it gets much darker when you get into Galton, because Galton was somebody who the best form of civilization in respect to the improvement of the race would be one in which society was not costly. Remember, it's all about the bottom dollar, where incomes were chiefly derived from professional sources and not much through inheritance. You will own nothing and be happy. Where every lad had a chance of showing his abilities and, if highly gifted, was enabled to achieve a first-class education and entrance into the professional life. Essentially meaning, if you can distinct yourself, prove yourself, we will give you the initial key to this new lifestyle, to this new upper echelon. By the liberal, remember this is where the Blue Church started, by the liberal help of the exhibitions and scholarships which he had gained in his early youth, where marriage was held in high honor, where the pride of the race was encouraged, and listen to this, of course I do not refer to the nonsensical sentiment of the present day that goes under that name. Very interesting. Where the weak could find a welcome and a refuge in celibate monasteries or sisterhoods. Essentially, the weak will have their own place in the world. And lastly, where the better sort of emigrants and refugees from other lands were invited and welcomed, and their descendants naturalized. So, right, this has been policy. This is what all these kids get taught. And by that I mean, when you go to these very distinct wealthy schools and when you go into getting groomed for these positions of inheritance, right, because you're a part of these families, and you're essentially going to eventually take over dad's or grandpa's position, that you must be put on game, right? You must have the education that they had in order so you don't fuck it up. And then he uses a Darwin argument in order for doing this. But this all goes back to this document. If I could remember. Kind of funny because it says it right here. The professional experts even found their way into American philanthropy as the managers of the new foundations. For example, Frederick Gates of the Rockefeller Foundation and R.S. Woodward of the Carnegie Institution of Washington. Although these experts were solidly middle-class professionals, they carved a niche for themselves in American society that allied them with the needs and aims of the wealthy elite who employed them. right? So if you believe the right things, if you do the right things, you can get into this upper echelon class, right? But again, you can just get into the club. You will never be one of these pure-blooded individuals that, you know, would have levers of control. Where can we go from here? This document's very telling. I've enjoyed reading it very much. Government, the ERO was involved in scientific management of planning of 2 levels. Yeah, this is more about the index card stuff. Philanthropy for social control. The concerns of progressives and eugenicists, right, these 2 things were synonymous and are synonymous, were the same concerns to which the wealthy and the coterie of managers and advisors who clustered around them were also responding. Both Mr. Harriman of the Carnegie Philanthropies were concerned with what the former called efficient giving. This meant, among other things, using philanthropic dollars to get at the cause of a problem and treat it at its source. It also meant, somewhat more indirectly, using philanthropic dollars to bring organization and order into research itself through an emphasis on cooperative efforts, creation of research institutions, and the like. Foundations in particular, as opposed to individual donors, played an extremely important role during the progressive era in translating the concerns of the wealthy elites into concrete, scientifically grounded research projects or into actual social planning. This was completely systematic from the very beginning. So anybody who usually finds themselves touting left-wing or right-wing politics, you've been cooked from the very beginning. From the very beginning. It's kind of sad to say that there is no free will or free thought, but it's not that. It's more that all of these things are just suggestions. They're provided to you. They're handed in front of you as truth, and you're meant to just roll with it. You're not meant to question or bring up the validity of the source. Either way. Moving on. Efficiency, rational planning, and expert knowledge thus were all concerns common to both the professional middle-class eugenicists, such as Davenport and Laughlin, and to the wealthy elites and their advisors. It was a convenient marriage of like minds and concerns. It is not surprising, then, that the wealthy contributed significantly to the funding base and continuing support of the ERO. They get into the funding stuff, like how much money was essentially given to them. And remember, this was back in like 1920, right? Like 1910, 1920. They gave them $3 million in that money. That's a lot of money. Either way. In conclusion, in the age that saw a decline of laissez-faire economics, political and social philosophy, and the rise of theories of scientific planning and social control, eugenics emerged as the efficient panacea for a variety of social ills, while eugenic solutions were not so prominent. It's a really great conclusion. But was there anything that I really wanted to read? Which was eugenics was the perfect biological theory of society in an era that was rapidly accepting notions of scientific management and control, just as social Darwinism had been the appropriate theory for an earlier generation committed to a classical economic and social policies of laissez-faire. All of this is deeply rooted in the same place. These kids, these people get taught all the same thing, and they're groomed to believe in all the same ideas. And I find it immensely interesting that nobody put 2 and 2 together, right? I bring this document back because it relates to what I was talking about yesterday with Kinsey, because his research by and large was used. I should actually just get the book. Page 55. I was reading it yesterday. Probably should take a picture of this, but either way. Dun, 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 dun. Put this down. Okay. According to Reisman, crime rates and the erosion of the family are only the tip of the iceberg when considering the havoc wreaked upon society by the sex research of a teen pregnancies, soaring STDs, rampant cohabitation, and single-parent homes are other areas that have been just as dramatically influenced by the widespread acceptance of Kinsley's research. But no member of society has suffered more than our innocent children. This gets all into wordy. I don't like books that use emotional language to kind of like emotionally charge me. Not a big fan of that. Distorted studies about women led to one of the most disastrous Supreme Court decisions ever made. Kinsey's research was used for this. Roe v. Wade. The model penal code was cited as a national authority on abortion 3 times in Justice Bachman's written opinion in Roe v. Wade. Reisman writes, Bachman cited page 147 of draft 9 of the model penal code, where Dr. Maria Calderon of Planned Parenthood states that Kinsey's scientific data proved that 90 to 95% of premarital pregnancies are aborted. Of course, we know now that Kinsey's data was collected mostly from among prostitutes and sexually unconventional women, and then passed off as indicative of the general population. Cooking the science from the beginning. Again, they find these people, fund them from the very beginning, and then use their research as if it's true. But from the very beginning, the research was cooked. The research was completely skewed from the very beginning. And it was all to influence the social paradigm of this country. There's so much evidence that literally proves like the steering of our culture, the steering of population, the steering of our education, our politics. I don't know. Very interesting how like just all this research material just lands on my lap. My name is Ramirez. Hopefully I taught something of interest. And hopefully everyone has a great day.